back with another video covering the Tbr7. As you can see, it's running, runs great. Quick rev. And let's quiet things down. So we're well past year 2 of ownership with a $1,650 shipped to my door Chinese crate bike. This one being a Tbr7. There is the Hawk 250, the CSC TT250. There's the Raven. There's plenty of other variants that run the CG based engine that is a clone of the Honda 125cc. This one started out as 229 cc's. It's now a true 250cc engine. There's a lot of things that I've done to this bike, and it seems the 1,000 mile review I made got some kind of conflicting results because people felt I did this stuff because I had to. That if you buy a Tbr7, you absolutely have to do a fork swap and a swing arm swap, put an exhaust system on it. You have to change all of this stuff. You don't. If you buy one of these bikes and simply want to use it, it really just needs jetted to your elevation. Preferably you just take the stock carburetor off. It's not very good. It has tamper-proof screws holding, well, tamper-proof bolts. I'm sorry, I know I'll get criticized for saying screws. Holding the float bowl on so you can't pop it off and just replace the extremely undersized 88 main jet that gets them imported into the country by passing the EPA emissions requirements that the US have. With that said, this bike has extensive modifications for a Chinese dual sport. Honda XR250 aluminum rear swing arm. It has much larger Honda XR250 forks. The headlight is from the Hawk 250. So the Tbr7 and the Hawk 250 have a slightly different headlight. And the Tbr7 accepts an H6M headlight bulb. Whether it be conventional halogen bulb or an aftermarket LED bulb, they're still just not very bright. So the Hawk headlight uses a much brighter bulb. It's the H4 bulb. It's brighter stock. It's extremely bright if you put an LED bulb in. Starting cluster swap, got rid of the old 80s looking analog cluster, put a digital setup on. Again, 2 odd some years later, still works perfect, no issues. The bars are replaced with a Pro Taper Evo Adventurer is what I believe they're referred to. They're a 1 1/8 inch fat bar. They're double wall aluminum. It has Pro Taper clamps and the Pro Taper bar pad, obviously. The seat was reshaped. They start with kind of like a weird hump in the seat. I had no purpose for it. I need to pull the cover back off here so I can sand it a little bit smoother. You can see it's not exactly perfect. And moving on to some more fun. So we got rid of that big giant fender they come with on the front. Placed it's a universal front fender. I believe it was intended for a Suzuki DRZ 400. But again, it's universal. So while that's what it was advertised as, it could be used on anything. You can use it with factory forks. You can obviously use it with the Honda forks as well. But we've done a lot of work with this engine. You can see I'm still running a Nibby PE30, which is a carbon copy of the Kian PE30 carburetor. Fantastic carburetor. If I had to recommend a carburetor, it's a Nibby hands down every time. A lot of people had trouble with using the Nibby intake. So Nibby recently released a PE28 FL version, FL designating that it has a flange, so it bolts directly to the factory intake. It's a much more user-friendly carburetor, so that's the one that I'm recommending to people from here on out. I also have a review video on it as I bought one, used it, ran it, tried it, liked it. My bike was just better suited with a 30mm carburetor versus 28mm because the head is ported, the head is polished, the deck height of the head has been altered for higher compression. There's been valve work done. There's upgraded valve springs in it, removing valve float above roughly 9,000 RPMs is where they start to break up. My ignition system is upgraded. I run the Nibby, yellow body coil because it's a carbureted bike. The fuel injected guys need the Nibby coil that has a black colored body. So it's a 2-prong, 2-wire coil. Both are a direct fit. Obviously I'm running a non-resistor boot, and I still use an NGK Iridium DR8 EIX, I believe is the model number for the plug. The cylinder is switched from the 65mm stroke, 67mm bore to a 70mm bore cylinder with a coated piston that we do here. They're available through Facebook. I found it and run the group. It's called the Chonda Riders. It's on Facebook, and the Chonda Riders Performance Parts is where I offer the 250 kit, or a big bore kit as it's more commonly referred to. They are $190 currently shipped with the thinner multi-layer steel head gasket, along with the coated piston, the new lower base gasket, essentially everything you need to make your CG 229cc into a 250cc. As you can see, I'm still running the JFG exhaust system for $90, whether you have a Chinese dual sport or whether you have the CRF 230F. I really do recommend this exhaust, as the next step up is the Yoshimura RS2, I believe is what the system is, and they start out at about $550. So that's a pretty large price increase from $90 to a $500 plus exhaust system, which both work perfect. Coming off of my head, I do use a titanium set of exhaust studs and nuts. Most of the factory hardware from this bike has been removed and replaced with grade 8 where strength was needed, or grade 5 titanium, or simply stainless steel hardware. My clutch springs are upgraded to an EBC clutch spring that was, I believe, designated for a Honda or a Kawasaki. Again, I have a video covering that. It's pretty straightforward. Remove the cover, bolts you have along here, pop off the clutch case cover, side cover, however you'd like to refer to it, and you have 6 8mm bolts to remove the original factory clutch springs, which is about a $12 upgrade. I really do recommend the clutch spring upgrade. I have a video covering it. There's a link in the description where you can buy the springs. The rear foot brake lever, as you can see, still using the aftermarket tip I put on there. I've changed the foot pegs again. These are the CSC TT250, at the very least aftermarket ones. I don't remember if the CSC TT250 comes with these foot pegs or not, but they're extremely nice. I like them. They're a whole lot better than the factory ones. The rear brake clevis, which this guy right here, this is from 3 Pedal Devils. They're on Facebook as well as YouTube. They really made a nice product here. The factory brake clevis was basically extremely thin piece of metal. They commonly broke or were just missing whenever you got your bike out of the crate. You went to assemble it and found out you couldn't have a functioning rear brake because there was no rear brake clevis. So I think 20 bucks shipped. They sell the billet aluminum setup. Whether you got the factory one like I did and want to replace it, or you just simply didn't have one to begin with, get in touch with them. It's a very nice product. As you can see, the fit is perfect. There was no modification necessary. You just simply removed the old one if you had one, or if you never had one to begin with, pop this one on. The rear master cylinder guard is from Autom. I honestly don't know how to say it. It's O-T-O-M. They're a company from China. I think the master cylinder guard cost me about 14 bucks. There's some anodized rear brake hose hardware just to hold the line in place. The rear master cylinder, I have to take off and put the Honda one back on. I took a Nissan Honda one from a Honda CR. Fits great. If you happen to need a new rear master and don't want to buy the Chinese one for obvious reasons, you can get one from a Honda CR. They fit. I believe the one I had was from a 1992 CR. The rear caliper is from, I don't remember. I bought it off eBay, mainly because I just needed new rear brake pads. The rear light is changed. It's the fender eliminator, as it's referred to, so you don't have that big bulky plastic in the back. For a rear tire, still running a 130/80/17. This is a Motaz Tractionator. Gearing, I run a 50 tooth in the rear, which is larger than factory. These bikes get shipped with a 15 front and a 46 on the rear. I use a 17 on the front and a 50 on the rear. Still gets my bike up to about 72 miles per hour on the GPS. And speed isn't really a concern. So I'd rather have more power made to the ground than have a higher top speed that I simply don't use. Another internal upgrade, the flywheel on these bikes is extremely heavy. I think the flywheel came in around 8 or 9 pounds, which is just a really heavy chunk of steel eating up power, throttle response. So took the flywheel off, put it on the lathe, removed I believe about 2.5 pounds from it. Bike runs a little smoother, revs up quicker, definitely allows the engine to make more power due to a loss in rotational mass. So, you know, all things considered, this bike makes a lot more power than a factory Chinese dual sport does. Again, though, not to have any conflicting information, this is not necessary just to buy one of these bikes and run it. If you get one of these bikes, assemble it correctly, add lock washers so things don't fall off. A lot of people prefer to use Loctite. I'm not a big fan of Loctite, as when you want to take something back off, well, it doesn't always come off that easy, depending on what color you use. If you do use Loctite, I recommend green, or you can use RTV. On the threads, RTV will act very similar to Loctite, but again, it's a lot more forgiving whenever you would like to remove the bolt that was installed and now you're fighting to remove. Still run the IMS shifter and still run the different front sprocket cover. I don't remember the price on it. I think this was 12 bucks. It says SRX on it. It was available eBay, Amazon, AliExpress, different places like that. But they're extremely fun bikes. I mean, you can't beat them for the price. Whether you're, looking to buy a bike and, modify it to the hill and back like I did, or you're just looking for something that's cheap and fun to run around the trails, or you want something that's extremely cost effective and fuel efficient to go back and forth to work on. You could get 50 to 100 miles per gallon on this bike depending on how you ride it and what's been done to it. Just please adjust the valve lash. Please replace the carburetor. 25 bucks, you can buy the clone 25 millimeter VM26 or PZ30. I know they're referred to as a 30 millimeter carburetor. They are not a 30 millimeter carburetor. They're just not. You can check it with a micrometer. I have a video on that. They are not 30 millimeter carburetors. So that's kind of another contradicting thing whenever I tell people get themselves a Nibby PE28 flange that bolts right on, and they say, well, I already have a 30 millimeter carburetor, why would I buy a 28? Well, it's because you don't. Plain and simple. I mean, again, would I buy another Chinese dual sport bike knowing everything that I know about them? Absolutely, without a question. They are simple, they're easy to work on, they're extremely reliable if you just do some very basic things to them when they're new and they show up in the crate. Like I said, you're gonna buy some new hardware, nuts and bolts. You're going to adjust the valve lash because they have no valve lash. When they show up, the valves are rock solid. No valve lash essentially means once the engine starts and it warms up, metal expands. No valve lash will not allow the valves to fully close. That forces the valves to stay open. You can drop a valve, you can break a valve spring, you can bend a push rod, cause a whole bunch of unnecessary headaches to your engine because you wanted to avoid a 30 to 45 minute procedure of adjusting the valves, which again, I have a video on. Valve lash adjustment is very well covered. There's plenty of people that have covered the valve lash adjustment. It is not a big deal. Do not be afraid to adjust your valves. It's not a question of if you should. Anyone who tells you that the valve lash does not need adjusted and or never needs adjusted is telling you a lie. Plain and simple. It's not an argument. It's not a debate. The valves have to be adjusted. I then recommend that you adjust the valves or at least check the lash to make sure that they are still set correctly every time that you change your oil. About 500 miles, 1,000 miles, whatever your service is. It just takes a few minutes to pop off the valve cover, take a set of feelers gauges, check to see if your valve lash is set correctly. You could set them at 0.002, 0.025, 0.003, 0.004 if you would like. They start getting a little noisy. I go with 0.003 for both my intake and my exhaust valve. That's the lash I've been using on this engine the entire time I've had it. Works perfect. It is an extremely solid bike. I mean, it's here, it's in one piece. I ride the bike hard. I take it through all the trails. I don't treat it any differently. I'm not easy on it. I just maintain it. I check my spoke tension, make sure the wheels stay true. I check my chain. My chain in particular is an R&K. You can buy a Niche, Niche chain if you would like. You could buy an R&K, a DID, a rental, whatever you want to spend on a chain. Just replace the factory chain. They're not very good. It's not recommended. Again, another failure point is the rear sprocket studs. The rear sprocket studs like to break. There's a couple different theories on why they break. Your chain's too tight is one of them. Whatever the case may be. I replace mine with Honda studs, OEM factory Honda studs. I think it was like 35 bucks to buy 4 replacement studs. Very well worth it. If you're going to ride the bike, last thing you want to do is shear your rear sprocket studs. That basically means your sprocket's going to spin and your wheel is not. Then comes when the studs break. Does it break the rear hub? The rear wheel hub is not available. You can't just buy a wheel hub. You got to find a wheel. The factory wheels that these bikes come with have been very complicated to find. They're starting to become a little easier to find, but why purchase a new wheel for $150, $200, have all that headache when you could just simply replace the studs, set the chain tension correctly, and avoid all of that. These are just some simple recommendations from somebody who's had this bike for a long period of time now, has ridden the living hell out of this bike. I've never had a single failure on this bike leave me stranded. This bike has made it home every time I've taken it out. It has started every time I've tried to start it. I've never had an issue with this bike running. It doesn't break down. It doesn't leave you on the side of the road. It's not as bad as some of these people say. There's reviews about these bikes on YouTube that, in a general sense, are not fair. They buy them, they take them out of the crate, they assemble them exactly how they come. They do not even rejet the stock carburetor on these, which is it's jetted extremely incorrectly. Unless you live at 6,500, 7,000 feet elevation, there is no way an 88 main jet is going to have this bike running correctly. So with no valve lash adjustment, no jetting, no oil change, as they come with shipping oil. They take them out, they run them, they show that it performed poorly. It didn't make good power. It wouldn't climb up a hill, this, that. It wouldn't go over 50 miles an hour. That's just not a fair example. These bikes are very capable of doing, 60 miles an hour in almost stock form. Carburetor, valve lash, 17-tooth front sprocket, and, you can get 60 miles an hour out of this bike. You change the exhaust, you upgrade the carburetor to a quality carburetor, let's say a Nibby. Take a little bit of time to tune it properly. Put the better ignition system on it. The ignition coil from Nibby is $20 on Amazon. Put a better spark plug in it. Take the Chinese Torch brand spark plug out. The bike will do about 70 miles per hour now. Well, 65, 70, rider weight, the terrain you're riding, whether it's hills, flat ground, can vary, but they're definitely not as slow as, people have made them out to be. Yes, mine is highly modified. It makes a ton more power than it probably was ever intended to make, but it's held up. I've had no issues with the crank. I've had no issues of any kind in the bottom end. I mean, you want to buy a bike, you want to get into riding, I really could not steer you away from a Tbr7 or a Hawk 250 or any other variant running the CG engine. Now there's overhead cam versions coming out and becoming more popular. The Templar is, I believe, $2,000 on Amazon. That's another very good example of a Chinese dual sport bike that is a lot of bang for your buck. I'm going to have to pick one up to do a review on, as I'm starting to get into the overhead cam modifications as well, porting the heads and doing bigger bore kits, bigger pistons, bigger bore cylinders, hotter cams. I'm not sure if I mentioned this one also has a aftermarket cam in it. They're all very capable bikes, and they're only what you make them. This bike is a great platform. The overhead cam ones are also a great platform. It's just what you make it into. With very little effort, very little money, you can make this bike extremely reliable and use it every day for a trail bike, a daily commuter, whatever your intentions are. These bikes are capable of doing it. I am not sponsored by Tau, RPS, BSR, CSC, or any of the companies whose parts that I am using. I have no affiliation with JFG for the exhaust example. They didn't pay me no money to say that their exhaust, after 2.5 years of use, has held up perfectly. For $90, I didn't expect much. I figured it would be a piece of junk and it would either not fit or it would fall apart in a couple months. you get what you pay for, but it's actually a really nice setup. Everything's held together very well. Everything works just like it did the day I got it. Battery's a little low on juice. Fires right up. Low beam, high beam, low beam, high beam, horn, turn signals, integrated into the handguards. Aftermarket levers, aftermarket perches. Again, not stuff you have to buy, but stuff that makes the bike more comfortable, in my opinion. If you have any questions whatsoever pertaining to a Chinese dual sport motorcycle, please ask. I'll be more than happy to help you get a problem that you have sorted out. Maybe you bought the bike used and it doesn't run right, doesn't run as good as you would like it to. Shoot me a message. I answer my YouTube comments. I'm also on Facebook. The group is the Chonda Riders. I'm also active in all of the other China bike groups as well. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on YouTube. I will be more than happy to help you get your bike set up. I've been doing it for years. I've helped thousands of people get these bikes running exactly how they wanted, get their problems sorted out, and I will have no problem helping you. Thank you for watching. I hope this helps you make a decision on, buying your first dual sport, or maybe getting back into riding after some years and you don't want to go to the dealership and drop $5,000 to $10,000 on a bike. This is your answer. Again, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. One last thing I'm going to add, you can see the stickers here on my bike. Rattle Can Customs. They are another awesome channel on YouTube. They build a lot of really wild stuff. They also have a Tbr7 that they are currently documenting the differences from directly out of the crate to how they perform with a carburetor, how they perform with an exhaust, and how they perform with the parts that I offer for them. The heads, the big bore kits, cams, things like that. They're going step by step in very, very, very good detail, showing 0 to 60 times, top speed runs, things that I didn't have a chance to cover, and obviously I can't go back and undo the things that I've done over the years. So, hope you enjoy your Chonda, and if you don't, I ask that you give it just a little bit of love, and I tell you right now, the bike will do exactly what you wanted it to do. So, thank you again. Have a great day. Be safe out there.